Hi everybody, this is Charlie. I'm a percussionist and I'm making this video to answer a lot of questions that I've gotten about how exactly I edit my videos, which you may have seen on Instagram or YouTube. So basically what people are reacting to is I have the sheet music, as you can see, which sort of follows along with my playing. And then as I play, there's this sort of red cursor which also tracks where I am in the sheet music. And people have asked, like, is that an application? What software is that? And really what it is it's just an edit in Final Cut that I do. There's no special software, it's just a little edit. So I'm here to show you exactly how I do that. I'm aiming to sort of help those that are somewhat new to Final Cut. Maybe you're making the switch over from iMovie like I did earlier this year. I'm not going to try and be exhaustive on this topic because it will end up with an hour-long video, but I also don't want to just sort of fly through this like so many Final Cut tutorials do and often sort of leave you with more questions than answers, although they might be the right questions. So we're going to start by looking at just what one of my finished projects looks like. So this is a finished video of myself playing a Wynton Kelly jazz piano solo called This I Dig of You. And so as you can see, that's the title of this project, and the library over here, and then you have the sheet music scrolling along. When you look down at the timeline, you see I have the video, I have the audio, there's this 360-degree color solid, it's called. It's just sort of a white rectangle, a pane of just white color that sits sort of behind the sheet music. So then you have all of these little bits of sheet music here, and you can see exactly how large they are, but they actually sort of sit on top of a white box, so that way this little margin right here doesn't shift. I don't have to be so uber precise with how I size the sheet music. I can just sit it on top of a stable white rectangle. And then here are all of these, they're called shapes. And so both that rectangle and the shapes, you're going to find them up here in the titles and generators sidebar, it's called. If you go to 360 degree, that's where you get the color solid. If you go to elements, that's where you get the shapes. More on that later, but I'm just sort of showing you around the project as it stands. And then as you see with the shapes, there is what's called keyframes, which kind of mark in time how this cursor travels across the screen. Okay, so let's go back to the beginning. This is how I sort of start a project. At this point, when I'm just getting started, I've recorded a session where I've taken video on my phone. That's why it has this sort of iPhone style title here. And I record in 4K, and then I record audio separately with a microphone, a dedicated microphone, which is a bit nicer than my iPhone mic. And so I have these two different sources of information, and I need to put them together. And then I have the sheet music down here. I usually type this up in MuseScore, which is a free app, MuseScore notation software, and then I export it. It only exports as PDFs, I think, so then I export it as a PDF, and then I have to convert those PDFs to either JPEGs or PNGs, which are what Final Cut supports. I usually do JPEGs, which has it appear like this with the white backdrop. PNGs are interesting because you can do it and have it be like a transparent, clear backdrop, so you only have kind of notes and staves, and you could set it on whatever color you wanted. You could have this sort of free-floating sheet music, so that's an option if you want. Go crazy if you want like a, green backdrop or something. We're going a little bit more traditionally here, so we're just going with the JPEG, which gives this sort of white standard sheet music background. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to create a new project. Oops. Well, I mean, you can just do Command N, which is my normal shortcut. All right, let's call this tutorial Wynton, because the name of the pianist is Wynton Kelly. Video, we're going to, let's imagine this is for Instagram, so we're going to go with square, change this resolution to 1080. Frame rate, I usually record in 30 frames per second. That's kind of standard. Sometimes for YouTube, I would go to 60 frames per second because it supports that. I don't think Instagram supports 60 frames per second, so we're going to stay with that. Okay. Boom, new project. So a very cool thing that Final Cut does is you can take your video and your audio, you just highlight them both, and Final Cut will sync them together for you. You don't need to do all that like sort of minute dragging around and getting it just right. You just highlight them both, right click, synchronize clips, Look at that. You can title it whatever you want. I just go with the standard thing because it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to now drag that synchronized thing into the project. Look at that. So it's already, it throws out the audio that was attached to the iPhone recording, which I was never intending to use. But it does use that information basically to sync up with this nicer audio that I did record with the microphone. And so it throws out that iPhone audio, which kind of gets all clipped, and replaces it with this. Really nice. So as time-saving as that is, I have found that generally for percussion, it's not like perfect. So after it syncs it for me, I detach the audio. What I've found is that generally the audio ends up just a couple frames ahead of what I want, which I think is especially apparent for percussion because you can actually like see the mallet landing, and if you can hear that note before the mallet lands, it's just a little weird and obviously incorrect. So let's see if we can sense that here. Yeah, you can hear how that articulated note, you can hear the articulation while the mallet is still like maybe a few inches above the bar right there. So that's why I'm going to zoom in a bit on the timeline. I'm going to just drag the audio over a little bit. Let's see how that lines up. Still a little early. It's closer. There you go. That's about as much as we need to really futz with it. Okay. Wonderful. And let's just shorten this clip because I know there's a few seconds before I actually play anything in this video. One thing which is really nice to enable, and you can sort of see happens a little bit here, there's this tool over here called snapping, which you can toggle with the letter N. That turns that on and off. Snapping basically, like it looks like two magnets sort of hitting each other. It's a way of Final Cut making certain kind of assumptions, like, oh, you mean to go here? Like it just will snap to the nearest likely thing. A lot of the times it's really useful for if you're dragging two objects around and you want one to start right where the prior one ends and not like slightly overlap or a slight gap. It just makes those assumptions for you, which is nice because you don't need to zoom way in and make sure that to the frame you've dragged and dropped things exactly just so. So I pretty much keep that on always, toggle that with N. And then another thing which I keep on pretty much always is this here. It's called the transform tool. And when you sort of zoom out of the playback right here, when I turn that off, it's just going to sort of show you exactly what your finished product looks like. When you turn it on, it gives you a little bit more information, and what's really nice is it allows you to just sort of manually drag things around like this, which generally at the start of a video I like to do. So then I can expand it a little bit and bring it down to about here, and you'll see that if I turn it off, it doesn't even like represent anywhere any of that excess video stuff in the frame. It just shows me the final product. So I generally keep that on and just remember that this square represents the actual frame of the video. Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to add that 360-degree pane of solid color. So we're going to just take one of these, drag it right down, start at the beginning, and then we're going to make it last for the duration of the video. It basically treats this as if it's its own video, even though it's really just, as you can see, a solid color blue. So over here you have all the sort of data on the selected item. I'm going to go over to the color tab of it, color, blue, not what we want. Go in here, find white. There you go. Alright, and now again with the transform tool, we're just going to drag it down a little bit. I'm going to make it a little bit larger just so that, yeah, it sort of goes out beyond the frame. It's, you know, a little easier to drag and drop like that. Okay, let's have it end just beneath the music stand. That looks pretty good. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go find that sheet music. First page of the sheet music right here. We're going to bring that into the project. You're going to see that, like, when you drag something onto the timeline, whatever's on the top of the timeline is going to sit on the top of your video. Just if you didn't know that, you can see how this just sits atop everything else we've made. If this were somewhere nested in the middle, then it would be sort of tucked in between the pane and the video or something. But basically it treats this like a desktop, and this is how you order whatever's on your desktop. So let's assume the sheet music is going to go about halfway into the video. We're not going to edit that far into the video, but that's about as long as we need this sheet music to be around. We're going to drag this sheet music down here. We're going to go over here, scale it. So we're going to adjust the size of it so that, here, make a little more space. We're going to adjust the size of it so that the staves just about reach the margin of the video. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We don't need this header on here, so to crop that out, we're going to go over to this crop area, top, and just take the top down like that. There you go. And you can see right there, that's the white plane. So I just aim to get it underneath that because I know that is going to stay where it is for the whole video. I don't want the sheet music to ever reach above that, so that way you just have that constant margin right there. Okay, so this is pretty much lined up. You know, it's about as large as we need the typeface to be. You can see that because it's sort of a densely packed piece of sheet music, there's like a little bit of the next line is peeking up here. So what we're going to do is we're going to crop the bottom of the page up a bit. Oh, that was too far. And there you go. So that now, that's pretty clean looking. Great. So what we're going to do is we're going to find where exactly this note happens and sort of facilitate the page turn. So we're going to just play the video. Alright, there it is. That's that last A flat, and right before I play the next note, we know where that is right now. So what we're going to do, we're going to do Command B, which is the blade tool. Boom. And what the blade tool does is it just slices up whatever is highlighted. So that just now put a little cut there. We now have two items. If we keep playing, okay, we can treat this effectively as like our second page. And yeah, we're going to raise it. We're going to just drag on the Y coordinates over here instead of manually doing this, just because this is more precise. If I dragged and dropped, then maybe there'd be a little bit of like diagonal action, and this just allows it to be, yeah, a bit more precise. So we're going to uncrop the bottom that we previously cropped up. Keep dragging. And then now obviously we're going to crop the top. Raindrop. Okay, that looks pretty good. Oh, actually, so you can see this note head, I went a little bit too far. We're gonna just enough. Okay, and that should be good. I think you get the idea of, I just sort of go through the video and I do page turn after page turn, and yeah, in this case we're working with 3 pages. It's kind of a long project, but that's how I end up with an end result that looks basically like this. So in this case I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 different pages, so to speak. And I did double up the lines because it saves time, and also because it was so tightly packed on the page. So that's how I do that. Once I've done all of that, I actually do another pass over all of it where I'm just making sure it's really well aligned with itself, so that when someone's eye reaches the end of, so this is the first page, when someone's eye reaches the end of this, they know like exactly, you know, where to bring their eye. I want these clefts basically to stay in the exact same spot from one page to the next. Actually, in this case they're looking pretty well aligned already, but let's still take a look at it and assume they're not. We go to the first page, here's where the clef is, and then I'm going to go 1 frame over, just press the right arrow. Yeah, actually that's like exactly in the right spot already, but normally it might be somewhere like just a smidge over. Let's drag it. Trying to drag it. There. So sometimes it's just like a little bit off, and so then I would manually be dragging it over. Let's just do that, even though I could just do Command Z. I would be bringing it over here, go 1 frame back, 1 frame forward. Alright, it's pretty close. Drag it down. 1 frame back, 1 frame forward. It's getting pretty close. How about that? You know, that's about as precise as we really need. I could obviously zoom in and be a real stickler with it, but basically once I've laid down the sheet music, I do another pass over it where I'm just checking that the treble clefs, or whatever clef you use, is staying put, and that makes the sheet music look really stable as the video goes on, and it takes about 5 to 10 minutes. Something useful to know about, you see this elbow here, this sort of translucent elbow, that is Final Cut's way of saying that we're on the first frame of something on the timeline. In this case, it's the sheet music. But it is just its way of saying, hey, something just changed, and this is that first frame of it. If we go 1 frame over, it's the last frame of this sheet music, and it's giving us this sort of reverse elbow, which, again, is Final Cut's way of saying something is about to change. This is the last frame of something in this video. It could have been, you know, if I were doing a bunch of different angles or something, it would be doing that for when the angles changed. But this is just its way of alerting you, like, hey, if there was some edit that you're making, like something is about to drastically change in the frame. So we've laid the sheet music down. Let's now get to the red cursor, which I'm sure a lot of you are curious about. So we're gonna, as I said before, that's a shape. We go to the shapes. In the titles and generators sidebar, we go down here to elements, shapes. Okay, I'm gonna drag one of those down here. Hello. What it starts out as, the default, is just this white circle with a red trim. It is not what we want. We want it to be a rectangle, so we're going to go over here and look at that shape. We're going to just choose rectangle. The color, the fill color, I actually have a particular red I like. Its hex color is FF0000. There you go, and that's a kind of intense type of red. They start you off with an outline. We don't need an outline. Just set all that to 0. The corners we're going to set to square. It also starts you off with like a little bit of a drop shadow. It's sort of, maybe you can see a little bit of the shadow on the bars. We don't need any shadow to this shape, so we're just going to set all these things to 0. And so then it's really just the red square, or rectangle. And we're going to drag that down, and now let's go to, let's change its size to be what we want it to be. We're going to change just the X scale of it so that it's pretty skinny. Maybe a little bit less. Let's just 2.6 maybe. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Bring it down over the first note. It's a little tall, so we're going to shrink. Yeah, like something like that. Oh. Okay. Yeah, that looks about right. It's not exactly where we want it just yet, but let's get it right over that first, oh shoot. Let's get it right over that first F. By the way, I just did Command Z for undo. Very useful shortcut to know. It's going to get you out of a lot of mistakes. I use it all the time. Command Z, undo. Okay, so we're going to change the opacity, which makes it translucent. You can see through it. So I'm going to set that to somewhere in the mid-80s. I usually do 85. So there you go. All right, you can already start to see the note underneath it, which is what we want. We want it to, the notes to still be visible as the shape passes above it. And then the last little thing we're going to do to it before we start animating it is we're going to go up to the what's called a blend mode, which is kind of like an Instagram filter. You have all these options to sort of put kind of just a last filter over the color you already have. I like to use darken. You're going to see what that does. It kind of softens up the red. The note underneath it becomes really clear, which that's really what I like about it. And it just sort of looks modern and crisp, and that's pretty nice. Now that the cursor is just how we'd like it, I'm going to just make a copy of it and then kind of just drag one over, just leave one over here as kind of a sort of blank that as I make more and more of these cursors, I'm just going to use this because I'm going to start animating this, and once that's done animating, I don't want to copy that, then undo all of the animating work just so I can get started on the next one. So I keep blank over here. Alright, in Final Cut, anytime you wish to animate anything in any sort of way, Final Cut's way of talking about animation is the word keyframe. That's what they call it, keyframes. So we're going to need to set keyframes on this red cursor so that Final Cut knows where we want it when. If we wanted it to, say, grow more or less opaque, we could set keyframes on that. If we wanted the scale of either the X or Y axis, or just in general, if we wanted it to shrink or expand over the course of the video, we could set keyframes on that. If we wanted it rotating, any of these things, you could animate that. In this case, all we're really doing is moving it left to right. We're just changing its X coordinates. But in order to do that, we're going to need to set keyframes on the video. Before we do that, just a nice thing, a nice shortcut I like to get rid of these sidebars over here is Control-Command-1. It just sort of takes those away so you have a little bit more room for the playback. I like that. And then maybe I'll take down the timeline so that, again, we can just see the whole frame here. Alright, so when you set a keyframe, look over here. There's these dark diamonds over here. As soon as we select one, you're just going to click on it. You see how it's now sort of highlit? That is now our first keyframe, and that is our way of saying, hey, this information, that's correct for now, but later, soon, we're going to be changing that, and that is something we wish to be animating. So now, like, Final Cut is sort of alert to this, and any changes we make soon to this, it's going to just assume as part of the animation. So at the beginning of the video, we want this right here. We actually want this to just stay here until I play that first note. So as soon as I play the first note, I'm going to actually set another keyframe with this same coordinates intact, just to let Final Cut know, hey, it's staying put, actually. So let's find that moment in time where I play that first note. There you go. So I'm going to set a keyframe here. Alright, so we found the first note, and we're going to now just find where exactly this B flat is. And I'm just going frame by frame. I'm just pressing the right key. There it is. That's the first B flat. So now, at this point, we're going to shift this cursor to the B flat. Look at that. Okay. You can see already it's like creating this little line. That's Final Cut's way. It's telling us, like, hey, I understand. Like, this is where we started, and this is where we now are in the video. So now we're at the B flat. So now that's the E flat that I just landed on. So we're going to drag this over to the E flat. There's the next E flat. There's the D. And let's just go to the next bar line. That's as much as we really need to do. And there's that last C as far as we're concerned. Alright, cool. So now look at this. We have this sort of animating plan going with this cursor. And we've just been dragging on here because we only want it moving left to right, right? If we were manually doing it, then I think the Y coordinates would be changing a bit, and it just wouldn't look as neat. This looks very sort of steady, just moving in a straight line like that. Okay, I want to show you the playback then of what we've created so far. You're going to see that it's close but not quite ready just yet. So let's watch. Are you seeing how it's sort of like, it's kind of like resting at its marks. It's not just sort of passing right through them, it's decelerating and then accelerating out of them. It's kind of landing a little too much. So that's actually just a setting we can change on each of these keyframes. We're going to highlight all of them because the way their default settings are is here. You right click and they're all set to smooth right now, which is what does that deceleration, and we're going to change all of them to linear. Okay, so here's how it looks when it's all set to linear. Wonderful. That is the finished product. That's how we want it to look. One note on setting these keyframes, just a thing I've noticed, is that generally it's a little bit nicer, I've found, if the keyframes are set just a couple frames after the note is actually played up here and sounded. And if it arrives at these notes just like 2 or 3 frames after the note is actually played, it somehow is just a little easier for the watching experience. I've found it's a little more intuitive that way. Certainly better than if the cursor is beating the playing to the note. Then it just really seems weird, and even when it just arrives perfectly at the same time, sometimes it just doesn't seem quite right. So I've generally found having the cursor visually kind of a little bit after the laying, arriving a little later than the playing is better. And that's basically, once I've animated it to the end of this line, once I play this note, I have the cursor arrive at the end of the line, and then I just go over here, take this one, copy that, and paste a new one right next to this, and I start again at this line, and that is how I end up with a finished project, which looks something like this. And you can see sort of right at the page turns, I'm animating the cursor to just go all the way to the very end of the stave. This is the last frame, as you can see by this reverse elbow. And boom, now it's appeared right here, and here's all the keyframes I've set for this line. They're all set to linear instead of smooth. You can see that up here this is lit up, which is, just means that I've activated keyframes on, in this case it's just the X coordinates, but it could have been both. So yeah, it's a pretty long video in this case. It's 2 minutes, which means that there's quite a bit of sheet music, and then as a result there's quite a bit of these shapes. But generally, sometimes it's just 40 seconds of playing and the sheet music isn't too complicated, and so an entire edit like this can be well under an hour, and in the case of something like this, yeah, it takes a bit longer, maybe an hour and a half or something. But that is my process, start to finish, and then you just export it up here, and voila. I hope that really helps you. If you have any questions, feel free to write a comment, and I'll be keeping track of who's writing what, and I'll try to answer as best as I can. If this was helpful, please go ahead and like the video. That helps other musicians find this video. And yeah, have a great time. Happy editing.